everyone. Before we begin today, as you can hear, Molly is out of the country, so I, Becca, would like to thank our newest patrons, Catherine, Renee, and Iris. Welcome to the team. Listeners, if you want to be like these lovely individuals, you can support our work at patreon.com/pod and prejudice, where you can enjoy perks such as following my journey through Persuasion for the first time, or submitting questions as your own study questions for us to ask during each episode. But without further ado, please enjoy our coverage of the final chapter of Persuasion, chapter 24, or if you're in a volumed book, volume 2, chapter 12.
Shall we talk about the last chapter of Persuasion?
Yeah, we should. And I was thinking about this today. We started reading this book in June this year.
Mm-hmm.
This took us no time to finish.
I know. Comparatively, this was so quick.
It took us like a year to read Emma the book, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we spent a year just watching Emma adaptations, right?
Yeah, it's kind of sad that it was so fast because I really liked it.
Well, if you think about it, a lot of our other books, the chapters are in the 30s. This was 24 chapters. Brisk, short, sweet, and to the point.
Yes.
Yeah.
Despite the characters never talking about their feelings until the last minute, which is, I guess, normal for a Jane Austen.
Yeah, we don't, you might not recall, but we don't exactly get insight into Knightley's psyche until the very end of Emma either. And that's a much longer book.
True. Well, shall we?
This is Becca.
This is Molly.
We are here to talk about Jane Austen.
We are here specifically to talk about
Persuasion. Listeners, if you're new here, I, Becca, have read many Jane Austen novels through my lifetime.
And I, Molly, am reading her for the first time through this podcast.
If you want to hear Molly read through Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, or Emma for the first time, you can listen to seasons 1, 2, or 3 of this podcast respectively, but that is not what we're doing here today.
No, today we are talking about Persuasion, Volume 2, Chapter 12, or if your book is not broken up into volumes, Chapter 24, or the final chapter.
The final chapter of Persuasion. Long one, so much happens.
So much happens, very long, not 8 minutes on the audiobook at all.
Listeners, I want you to know that I spent a long time trying to figure out whether or not we were going to do this chapter as one piece with the letter and have us end on the letter. And I decided against it because I wanted you to have Molly just solely focused on the letter for the entirety of that episode. And instead, I figured, we'll find a way to talk about this last chapter for a while.
Yeah, I think that the chapter before this one really needed the space to breathe. Also, we talked about it for 2 hours and then had to cut it down. So
Don't tell everyone that. They're going to want the full cut.
anyway, let's talk about the final chapter, I guess.
Should I recap what happened last
Oh,
week?
yeah. Tell us what happened. Tell us what happened.
Wentworth got into his feelings and gave Anne a letter that blacked her out for a little while because he told her she pierced his soul and he was half agony, half hope.
And that was beautiful.
Yeah. And then they basically confessed their love for one another. And Anne was like, I'm so happy. I don't even trust how happy I am.
Yeah. It's too good to be true.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Do I need to say anything else? I guess the fact that we got the whole book from Wentworth's perspective kind of.
That sums it up pretty well. Now they are in love. And so we'll find out what happens next.
They are in love.
We have to tie this all up with a neat little bow.
Yes, we do.
So this chapter starts off with Jane Austen in her rocking chair saying that when two young people are in love, no matter if they're an imprudent match, they're poor, they've got nothing going on for them, they will persevere to get married. She says, this may be bad morality to conclude with, but I believe it to be truth, which I was like, whoa, a first person comment from Jane Austen.
I love it. She's like getting to the end of the book and she's like, you know what, guys, they're getting married.
Yeah, she's like, I'm here to just tell you what happened. And she thinks that if people like that can succeed who aren't well matched, how could Wentworth and Anne, who are perfect for each other and also have an independent fortune, one independent fortune between them, fail to overcome all opposition to their match?
Yeah, basically, I mean, she's like, people are going to fall in love and get married. It might as well be rich, hot people who love each other.
It might as well be, if only we
That
could
is
all be
like-
rich and hot.
That is like the subtitle to every Jane Austen novel. People are going to fall in love. It might as well be rich, hot people who love each other. People will marry. The cousins will marry. It might as well be rich, hot people.
The cousins will
The cousins.
marry.
Not in this one, they won't.
No. As it happens, Sir Walter and Elizabeth don't object to the match because Wentworth is no longer nobody.
Mm-hmm.
He was now esteemed quite worthy to address the daughter of a foolish spendthrift baronet who had not principle or sense enough to maintain himself in the situation which Providence had placed him.
Burn
Savage.
Jane Austen, but also very interesting because as we started this book, we talked about this, how Anne's position is somewhat precarious because her father has demoted them essentially
Yeah.
by being spend happy, I guess.
Yeah.
And now there is a way in which, like, yes, Anne has title and Wentworth doesn't. Anne is from a landed gentry family and Wentworth isn't. But in some ways, Wentworth has the upper hand. He's the more eligible match than Anne at this point.
Yeah, he has an independent fortune, whereas Anne can only get a portion of her inheritance that she'll get when her father dies. Also, he's hot, which is important to Sir Walter.
Yeah, he is hot. We've stressed the fact that Anne is hot.
But Wentworth,
He's hot.
he's very hot.
Yeah, we've talked about this because he did get a revenge bod. Over the course of like 8 years, if you recall, she like sees him and she's like, damn it, he's even more attractive.
He was working hard in the Navy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, listen, I don't want to clock myself too hard, but we've all broken up with someone and then taken pains to look extra hot on Instagram.
Yes. You're acting like this is the first time you've clocked yourself for wanting to look hot in front of your exes.
Oh, yeah. No, it's basically been me talking about this book. Like, we're all Wentworth, we're all Anne, we're all panicking, and we're all trying to impress our exes. Like, maybe I'm wrong or maybe I'm petty, but my experience is no matter how good the terms are with your ex, you always want to be like doing a little better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course. So Sir Walter ends up putting their marriage into the marriage book, which is a nice little way to bookend the story. It starts with him opening up the book and ends with him closing the book.
Yes.
And was really only worried about one person's opinion, and that's Lady Russell. Lady Russell had a real come to Jesus moment.
Yeah, she's basically like, well, I don't like him, but fuck, I was wrong before about Mr. Elliot, and I just have to accept that I was wrong, so maybe I was wrong about him.
Yeah, she accepts that she is totally and completely in the wrong. She admits that she had been unfairly influenced by appearances. So when Wentworth's manners didn't match her own ideas of propriety, she assumed that he had a character of, quote, dangerous impetuosity. And Elliot was very smooth. And so she assumed that he had all correct opinions and a well-regulated mind and was perfect. But ultimately, her primary objective is Anne's happiness. And it always has been. And I thought this was a really sweet way to like throw things into perspective. While she might have like her flaws and she's uppity and she's classist, more than any of that, like she cares more about Anne than any of that.
We've come full circle on Lady Russell. We start the book, we love her immediately. At least this was my experience. And then you find out she broke up, Anne and Wentworth, and you hate her. And at the end of the book, I kind of had the feeling that like she was misguided, but not ill-meaning.
No. And that's kind of how I felt for a lot of it. And I think how Anne has felt as well, which is that she can't blame Lady Russell for doing what she did because she thought she was doing the right thing.
It's almost like sometimes people break up because of circumstances outside of their control.
Yeah. And in the end, Lady Russell, quote, found little hardship in attaching herself as a mother to the man who was securing the happiness of her other child. She's her mama.
She is her mama.
I mean, she has her mama, but her mama is dead, and Lady Russell took on that role when she died.
And that's like the undercurrent of the entire book. It's not that Lady Russell's just her prestigious friend who advised her one way or another. Like Lady Russell explicitly stepped into her mother's role in her life.
Yeah.
And, wants to see her well situated. And she is now well situated because Wentworth made good on his own ambitions.
We love a success story.
We love a man who makes good on his own ambitions.
Mary, iconically, is taking credit for the match.
I have to say, so like I was going through like how everybody's story wraps up here. I love that Mary just starts a legend, ends a legend.
And honestly, throughout, legendary.
No character development, no self-awareness, just pure icon status this entire book.
We love a growth arc and we also love the complete lack of one.
Yeah, like I feel like she's the opposite of a growth arc. Like not even like a descent into madness either, just like a pure like resounding note of what's the right word here? Merriness. Like she's so Oh god, everything she does, not a touch of self-awareness,
Mm-mm.
not a touch of reflection, no, realizations about who she is as a person, no desires to change, no conflicts met through the book, just pure Mary, and you know what? Thank you, Jane Austen.
Thank you for Mary.
Thank you for Mary.
Yeah, so she's like, "Oh, Anne stayed with me, and that's where she met Wentworth, so I take credit." I don't know still if Mary knows about their past, like, is that ever gonna be revealed to her? I mean, there's no more books, so it's not,
I mean, I presumed at some point it would probably be revealed,
like, right now, she's like, "They got back together or got together in my presence, so thanks
yeah,
to me."
or if someone's told her, she's like, "Ah, I reunited the lovers.
Yes, yes.
You're welcome."
What can I say except you're welcome?
Eh, Meanwhile, if, like, you recall this portion of the book, Mary Mary was, like, leaving and to take care of her sick child so she could go hang out with Wentworth.
Yep, yep. Literally no self-awareness at all.
God bless her.
Mary needs her own sister to be better than her sisters-in-law, so she is very happy that Wentworth is richer and hotter than Benwick and Charles Hayter. But she is a little bit bummed that Anne now has seniority over her again because Anne's older.
Anne is more accomplished than Mary, Anne is prettier than Mary, Anne is older than Mary, Anne is better liked than Mary, so Anne has beat Mary at everything throughout life, and that undercurrent of jealousy is played out through many of their interactions in this book, despite the fact that Mary is very obviously the most loving towards Anne of her family, but that's pretty low as far as bars go.
Mhm.
But what she had over Anne was that she was married and had kids, which, women in society, that's like social capital. Even today is annoyingly relevant. But like social capital for a woman in this time of being a married woman versus being an unmarried woman, that is a really stark difference between Mary and Anne at the beginning of this book. Like Anne was the sad spinster aunt at the
Mhm.
beginning of this book.
Mhm.
Now she is this hot young thing. It cannot be stressed enough how unbelievably hot Anne is.
So hot.
And she has snagged one of the most eligible bachelors in Bath,
Mhm.
um, through nothing but being hot and awesome. So, all this to say, the one advantage Mary had over Anne through the entire book was being married,
Mhm.
and now she no longer has that.
Right.
But what she does say is that even though Anne's match is super wealthy, the fact that she's not marrying into the landed gentry or the aristocracy makes this acceptable because Mary still has title over her.
Right, she doesn't have an estate. Um,
Exactly.
and there's no possibility of Wentworth getting.
You can purchase land.
But what I'm saying is they specifically said as long as he doesn't become a baronet, there's no way that that would ever happen in terms of, like, inheriting from her father. That has to go through Elliot still.
That's a good question because I think if Anne had a son, it might complicate things. No, yeah,
No,
yeah.
because like, it wouldn't be her heir that I think that no matter what, Elliot is gonna get the estate as long as her father doesn't have a son. Because her father it would have to be her father's son.
You mean it's patrilineal?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true or not, but I think it might be true. I don't recall whether or not like you can inherit if you're like the grandson through a daughter.
Mhm.
But that being
Either
said,
way, it wouldn't be Wentworth no matter what.
no, I don't think it would be. But I also think like what she meant is he can't buy his baronetcy.
Right.
Well, which he could, but he
But
won't.
he won't, and also yeah,
Yeah,
that's what Mary hopes anyway.
yeah, and Wentworth could buy land still.
Yes.
It's hard to get one of these estates
Right.
because, as you saw, they're like all entailed and all this stuff to people like Mr. Elliot. But sometimes they do actually go up for sale,
Mhm.
and when they do, people like Wentworth swoop in and take them.
Okay, well, Mary hopes that that doesn't happen, so she still has that leg up.
Yeah. Well, she hopes that he doesn't get the aristocracy because I think like
Yes.
her thing is like, oh yeah, you might be richer now and yeah, people might like you better, but I'm still part of the landed gentry. You're not there yet, and I don't think him buying into it is as good as me having someone who inherited,
Mhm.
and therefore the only way he could raise up is through baronetcy.
He could get knighted,
I guess he could.
but Mary's not really thinking about that. Mary's thinking about Mary.
Well, Mary, yeah, the long and the short of it is he's a perfect match for Anne for Mary's purposes because
Yes.
he's better than her sisters-in-law did, but he's like in her own little like mechanism, not necessarily quite as good as Charlie Musgrove in terms of like the economics of dating in Jane Austen, although by some measures he's better because I
Mhm.
think he's richer,
Yeah,
but you understand.
I understand.
Yeah.
So, Elizabeth, however, has no consolation in this match.
Dark.
Dark. She was mortified when Elliot left after Anne and Wentworth got engaged. Now,
Yes.
Elliot finds out about Anne's engagement, and his best hope of keeping Sir Walter single goes down the tubes because he had been planning on keeping a close eye on him as a son-in-law. But soon after he leaves Bath, so does Mrs. Clay.
What?
And the next they hear of her, she is under his protection in London. Called it.
Sure did.
I called that.
Yes, you did.
Um,
Almost makes up for you being like, why am I standing Mr. Elliot so hard? You know, it comes in multitudes. Sometimes you're like right on the target.
mhm.
And here you are.
And here I was. So basically, Mrs. Clay and Mr. Elliot have a thing.
Mhm.
And Mrs. Clay's affections for Mr. Elliot overpowered her interest in Sir Walter since Mr. Elliot is young and hot.
Mhm.
And she stops scheming and runs off with him.
Mhm.
So here's what I think is going on here. Elliot still makes sure in this way that Sir Walter can't have an heir because he steals his girl.
Yep, exactly.
So therefore, he will still inherit the estate, and he and Mrs. Clay both still win
Yep.
at their own individual games.
Yeah, except they both lose because they have to be married to each other.
Right. I mean, Mrs. Clay, I didn't hate.
Austen gives her kind of a harsh punishment here. A
Yeah.
bit of a Lydia Bennet situation where you're like, you weren't so bad that you deserved Mr. Wickham.
Right.
But it is certainly like a punishment Jane Austen has doled out to this character.
Yeah, and especially because I highly doubt that Elliot actually likes her. I mean, like, he might like her, but I doubt that he actually would have chosen her for himself because it's so clearly just a pull to get Sir Walter's girl.
Yeah, it's a blatant protection of his own interests.
Yeah.
And as we've seen with him, he does that a lot, and he's not necessarily the nicest.
No, he sucks.
Yeah, to his spouses. So it's a sad fate.
Yeah. Sir Walter and Elizabeth, however, still have the Dalrymples.
The who?
The Dowager Viscountess Lady Dalrymple and Baby Dalrymple.
Yes, they do.
But to flatter and follow others without being flattered and followed in turn is a state of half enjoyment.
Tell that to Mr. Collins.
He loves to flatter.
Pure bliss with Lady Catherine de Bourgh.
Anne's only qualm in this whole situation is not having a family that can receive Wentworth with the same warmth, goodwill, respectability, etc. like his family did for her, because obviously his family is the Crofts, who rock.
The best.
She only has two friends to offer him, Lady Russell and Mrs. Smith. Wentworth forgives Lady Russell. He still doesn't think she was right, but he loves everything else about her, so he's willing to accept her as his mama.
Mm-hmm.
And Mrs. Smith. He loves Mrs. Smith. He helps Mrs. Smith regain her husband's property in the West Indies.
Mm-hmm.
Bada boom. Which requited the services which she had rendered or ever meant to render to his wife. The services being
Getting that's what she wanted out of Anne in the first place. When she found out Anne was potentially going to marry Mr. Elliot.
right. But I thought this was saying that he's paying her back for some service that she did for Anne.
I think
The friendship, the
potentially the exposure to Mr.
oh,
Elliot.
that's kind of where I was thinking. Like, I think that he is assuming because she told Anne that Elliot was bad news. That's how, like, he's repaying her for that. But I've felt like that brushes over some of the complexities of the situation.
Sure does, but it's at the same time, it's a fun and witty line from Jane Austen.
Yes. Oh, this next bit is so fun. Mrs. Smith's enjoyments were not spoiled by this improvement of income, with some improvement of health, and the acquisition of such friends to be so often with. For her cheerfulness and mental alacrity did not fail her, and while these prime supplies of good remained, she might have bid defiance even to greater accessions of worldly prosperity. She might have been absolutely rich and perfectly healthy, and yet be happy. I thought that was very funny from Jane
Oh,
Austen.
yeah, she's given us a little tongue in cheek about Mrs. Smith's capacity to be joyful in her little horrible apartment in Bath.
Yeah. And also people with money being grumpy and having less of that alacrity of
Mm.
mind.
Yes, exactly. I will say also, we talked about this earlier. You'd said a couple times, like, "Oh, she needs Mr. Elliot." She needed a man.
She just needed a man.
She just needed a man, because and a wealthy man at that.
Yes.
But she found one, and
Yeah.
he was more than willing to help.
And she will be perfectly happy going forward without a man, which I
Ah,
love for her.
yeah. To be in the Jane Austen times and just be like crocheting and gossiping. I mean, it wasn't great because of the whole, you know, you have no rights situation.
Yeah, that situation.
I know, but like it does seem like appealing to be wandering around your own estate and, you know, knitting. It's why we all love these books, right?
Yeah,
We
absolutely.
want it. We want to like feel cozy and like happy in our own little walks and our own little
Yeah.
painting and like our own little like, enjoying the English countryside.
Yeah, totally. I mean, these books are cozy as heck.
Yeah, so the idea I like pictured Mrs. Smith in like a nice little like parlor, like doing nothing but like knitting her little booties, but now she doesn't need to do it for income. She just does it for fun.
Yeah. Oh, we love her.
Ugh, love it.
As for Anne, she is tenderness itself and has the full worth of it in Wentworth's affection. An odd note to end on, but the only thing that makes her wish she loved him less, or her friends wish that she loved him less, is his profession, because there's always this dread of a future war that could dim her sunshine.
Dun dun dun.
Dark.
Yeah, it's true. But at the
She
same time,
lives in constant fear of him dying.
well, yeah, but I mean, it's more like him going away
Sure.
because at this
Yes.
point he's managing the naval troops, not like he's not a foot soldier.
I see. So it's a constant fear of him being called away for several months at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But she's perfectly happy being a sailor's wife, and so she loves it.
Yeah, you kind of like in my brain, like you kind of get the sense that they're going to be Admiral and Mrs. Croft,
Mhm.
in their own right. And Anne might have the capacity. It's like hinted at a couple times in the story. Anne has never seen the world and has never really traveled outside of England. Anne is going to Lyme, and Lyme is beautiful, and she likes the sea there.
Mhm.
And it's like the first thing she's ever seen outside of Somersetshire. And you just get this, like, picture of Anne, like, living a life of warmth, happiness, and adventure with Wentworth, and it's
Yeah.
like, ugh, I love that for you.
Happy ending.
Happy ending to our 4th finished Jane Austen novel.
Ah! Wow.
Oh my
We did
gosh.
it.
Yes, which brings us to the study questions. I'm going to remind you guys one last time as we finish this book that you can ask study questions if you are a $15 patron on our Patreon. Molly will post a Google Doc and you will be able to post whatever questions you want and we'll ask them on the air. It just so happens that our patron study questions overlap pretty heavily with my study questions, which happens sometimes on this podcast. So I'm going to kind of do them in tandem and just ask you some study questions. I will give credit when the question comes from one of our dear patrons. So know that if you have a patron study question that overlaps with mine, we are on the same wavelength as we finish this novel. All right, question 1. Why did Austen put Mrs. Clay and Mr. Elliot together as a form of punishment?
I have trouble thinking of it as a form of punishment. I guess in a way it could be considered punishment to Mrs. Clay, or punishment for Mrs. Clay for being a little bit scheming and conniving. Like, yeah, she got what she wanted, which was she will eventually inherit this estate, but she
Mhm.
had to be with Mr. Elliot, who sucks, to get it.
Yes.
So I guess it's a form of punishment for her. For him, I'm a little frustrated because he still gets what he wants.
Yeah, but that's kind of why I think Mr. Elliot's an interesting character because what do we read into him Like, if you recall our discussion about Mr. Elliot when it was revealed that he was a snake,
Mhm.
um, I read one line, like, over and over again about his, like, incapacity to feel happiness and, like, purpose, and, like, he sought money his whole life, all he wanted was money, and then he had an endless supply of money, and then he was like, "What do I want now? What do I want now? I want my title. I wanna be a baronet," and he relentlessly pursues that.
Mhm.
Now he's kinda secured it again.
And he's gonna probably stop being happy.
What's next?
He didn't find love, so
Surely not.
now he's gonna be with a woman that he doesn't love, and he's gonna wish that he was with someone else.
I do think that Mrs. Clay gets the rougher end of that stick,
Absolutely.
because he sucks. Also, like, she's not gonna be a baronetess. She's not going to be the mistress of Kellynch for years,
Right.
when she was close to being that if she just kinda sucked it up and married Sir Walter. Oh, that's a weird question. Who do you think would be less pleasant to be married to, Sir Walter or Mr. Elliot?
Man.
It's a tough call.
I mean, you know that I was really into Mr. Elliot for a lot of this book, and Sir Walter fucking sucks. So does Mr. Elliot because of what he did to Mrs. Smith, but in terms of, like, pleasantness to be married to.
I am gonna say I would rather be married to Sir Walter than Mr. Elliot for 2 reasons.
Sir Walter's daddy.
Well, Sir Walter is supposed to be hot, but
Yeah.
he's also ugh because of everything about his personality.
Yeah.
But Mr. Elliot is also kinda supposed to be hot, so that's not really factoring into my decision here.
Mhm.
One, I would say in this book, both of them have been cruel and awful. Both of them have done terrible things to women they have power over. I think that Sir Walter would be more influenced by good influences around him than Mr. Elliot. And I think that, like, his association with Lady Russell, for example, would be something that would rescue you slightly because you'd spend a lot of time with people who would stop him from being cruel to you.
Right. I also think that he would probably not mind me just, like, going off and doing my own thing. Like,
Yeah.
get me some paint, get me some writing utensils.
It's Charlotte sending Mr. Collins out to garden.
Exactly.
Like, you find your ways to avoid talking to him, whereas Mr. Elliot seems like kind of like a bully to the women he doesn't care for who he marries.
Yeah, and also if he would just be miserable to be with.
Yeah. I think, like, on the surface, Mr. Elliot's the obvious one you'd rather because he's flirtatious, he's fun, people like him in society, he has a decent reputation amongst most,
Mhm.
and he's, out there partying, he's, like, vivacious, like, there's a lot of reasons why you think a Mrs. Clay who's not thinking too hard about this would, go off with him,
Yeah.
but I think at the end of the day, as embarrassing as Sir Walter is, as cruel as he is to Anne, like, better than Mr. Elliot because is you can stay away from him and you can, have him sort of you have a stopgap, a buffer, if you will, with the sensible women in his life,
Yeah,
like Anne and
totally.
Lady Russell.
Yeah.
Okay. Question number 2. What does it do to this book to have a particularly happy ending? Like, how does that form the story? I think Jane Austen's first line kind of touches on this,
Jane Austen's first line of the book
of the
or of the
chapter.
chapter. That line is, "Who can be in doubt of what followed? When any two young people take it into their heads to marry, they are pretty sure by perseverance to carry their point, be they ever so poor, or ever so imprudent, or ever so little likely to be necessary to each other's ultimate comfort." How does it form the story, like, in retrospect?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, spoiler alert for Sex and the City. So if you don't wanna get this show from 20 years ago spoiled for you, skip this part. But, Sex and the City is like an anti-rom-com in a lot of ways. It is a critique on what women need in terms of love because the television series centers the female friendships, and for all of its other flaws, its kind of message is crystallized in its 4th season when Charlotte leans over to all of her best girlfriends and says, "Maybe we could be each other's soulmates, and guys can just be these people who come and give us a really good time in our lives." And that's kind of the point of that story. So there is an argument that Sex and the City's message is devalued by the fact that one, all of the women end up married at the end, and two, specifically, Carrie ends up with Big. There's a lot of debate online. It's leaned heavily anti-big in recent years, but there is a question of whether or not that's the show betrayed what it was about in the first place by having these women end up like the happy ending being finding love with men. And what I'm asking is in this story where Jane Austen, a writer who famously says, all of my heroines get what they want eventually at the end of the book. Well, not that quote exactly, but verbatim, that's what she said. What does it do to this particular story that they end up together?
So I guess up until this point, I mean, we've talked a lot about Anne having been persuaded away from Wentworth and who was right and who was wrong. And a lot of the themes have been getting over someone, moving on, whether it's okay to move on, whether you should move on, but primarily whether Anne was right to be persuaded by Lady Russell and whether Lady Russell was right to stop the marriage from happening. And there were 8 years of consequence, but then they still ended up together. And what am I trying to say? I'm just kind of rambling.
Yeah, I kind of threw that one at you.
Let me think. It is a very happy ending for a book that spent so much time with the main character being depressed and panicking.
Yes.
But I don't think that it contradicts the moral of the story, so to speak, because even though Lady Russell was wrong to persuade Anne away from him, she was also right because she was doing what she thought was best. And even though Anne spent 8 years regretting it, she ultimately comes to the conclusion that she was also right to do what she did. I guess it a little bit is like, well, they still got what they wanted, even though they made these big mistakes, or even though they made the right decision by breaking up, they still ended up together. But I don't think that's a bad thing.
I mean, yeah. So just to clarify, I love a good rom-com. I don't think it's a bad thing to have a happy ending. I think for me, it falls into 2 buckets, and it's kind of just an interesting thing to think about. On one hand, I think you're totally right. The meditations on love that this book has, this is a perfect payoff because this book is asking real questions about how long love can persist without hope
Mhm.
and what it means to truly love someone beyond all sort of logic and
Yeah.
reason and what it means to be sort of physically unable to be persuaded away from another person. That is a really powerful story, and I think it's told pretty powerfully through Anne and Wentworth.
Mhm.
Very beautiful, very sad.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the questions that come up in the class narrative in this are really like some of the boldest that I've seen Jane Austen take on. There's another thing popping up that I will not spoil, but might deal with class in an interesting way as well, in a different way. But Jane Austen asks the question of like, what happens if love is inconvenient in this book? And what happens if you can't get over an inconvenient love? And she answers it very conveniently.
Yeah, because he becomes convenient.
He becomes extremely convenient in the story. But there's a different question of what if Wentworth hadn't become convenient? What if Anne was still hung up on this man and he was still not right for her? Like in like a society sense. In this, it's uncomplicated that he's unequivocally a good match at this point. He's wealthy independently and he's, sturdy and eligible, but that's very convenient for our narrative here, which and I mean, on the other hand, I will say, like, you get the sense that part of what Anne loved about him was his ambition and his drive that did cause him to pull himself up in class rank, but there are unanswered questions about what happens if someone's an inconvenient person you can't stop loving. And there are other books that explore that really beautifully, but this is the closest I think I've seen Jane Austen get to exploring what it means to not be able to stop loving someone no matter what society says.
Mhm.
And then it's kind of like, oh, well, don't worry about that because society is fine with him.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, it's super satisfying that he gets to have such an "I told you so"
Hmm.
to the Elliots. On the other hand, just for a thought experiment, imagine Anne might love his ambition, and she does, and he stays ambitious those 8 years and fails and continues to, like, strive for to win,
Greatness.
and he
Yeah.
continues to fail, and then they meet each other again, and they're still in love, and he still loves her, and she still loves him even though, and then what happens when they're thrown together again and again, which maybe they wouldn't have been if he hadn't gone to the Navy and he hadn't but, like, say they're thrown together for some other reason,
Yeah.
what happens when they can't let go of it? It would be a really interesting story that maybe Jane Austen well, it's not the story she wanted to tell, so she didn't, but
Well,
I'm interested.
perhaps some other author from 19th century England has told this story in an interesting and different kind of frame. Perhaps we'll read that one day. I don't know.
Wuthering Heights?
I don't know what you're talking about. What?
That was funny.
Okay. So this next question is the first that is really on point with one of our patron study questions. So this is from Katrine. Aside from Anne and Wentworth, do the other people in the novel get a happy ending? Think of Mrs. Clay and Louisa. Will they be happy in life, or have they potentially made a mistake in choosing a partner? Similarly, with Elizabeth and Sir Walter, is happiness in their future? This goes perfectly with my question of do we find the endings fitting for Elizabeth and Sir Walter, Lady Russell, Mrs. Smith?
Okay, let's go through, I guess, person by person. We've already talked about Mrs. Clay.
Yeah, I
We
think
feel bad for her.
Yeah.
Louisa, I mean, I love Bennick.
Bennick is fantastic. I do think Louisa's story is kind of a morose one because it is sad to have a woman have to become serious in her youth because of a head injury.
Yes.
I'm happy she has a partner who takes care of her and can match her in that sort of melancholy. But I do think there is her happy ending is not as clean as, say, for example, her sister's happy ending.
Yeah, I don't think I find it hard to judge the relationship since we didn't really get to see them together, aside from just hearing that he was reading to her in bed, and, like, obviously, at that time, she was still very much recovering,
Mhm.
so we don't get to know, like, how they're gonna flourish together.
Yeah. I take a lot from that sentence from Mrs. Musgrove talking about how her daughter's now, like, jumpy and, not as sort of vivacious as she used to be. That
Yeah.
makes me sad for her.
Yeah, I feel sad for her, especially because it all came out of a moment of her vivaciousness.
Yeah, she's this headstrong, vivacious girl who's, suffers really bad consequences for having fun, you
Yeah,
know?
and she knows that. I think she's learned that
Yeah.
that was a direct result of her fucking around.
And also just, like, that's just not something she's ever gonna forget. Like, it's
Yeah.
going to inform the rest of her life, and that is very sad.
Yeah. So that's sad. I mean, but I don't think that in terms of like her happy she doesn't have a happy ending in terms of herself, but I think that Bennick will help make her ending better.
I think if you're going to suffer a head injury of that caliber in a book, that is about as happy an ending as you can hope for,
Yes,
which
absolutely.
is recovering healthily, being a little bit more of a somber person than you used to be, and ending up with someone who can match your newfound melancholy. I think that's pretty okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Sir Walter and Elizabeth are purely punished.
Sir Walter and Elizabeth, yeah, whatever. They can suffer. Also, like Elizabeth punished doesn't get a happy ending, will never have a happy ending. Happy for me because I want her to end up alone. And Sir Walter also ends up alone, but he doesn't seem like I mean, he's embarrassed, but I feel like he's not heartbroken per se.
I mean, I think the doom spelled out for those two at the end of this novel is they haven't learned from their mistakes, so they
Mhm.
will continue to make those mistakes.
And they're gonna continue to be hot and lonely.
Hot and lonely, I think, is the doom that these two face
Yes,
together,
which is great for them.
and potentially poor, except for the fact that now, they have two married off daughters who
Yeah,
are
but
in good circumstance.
unfortunate and yeah, the thing is, if Mary and Anne weren't well, if Anne wasn't such a good daughter and if Mary wasn't so clueless, they wouldn't help them.
Clueless. Huh?
Mm. But they're gonna help them probably because they're good people.
Yeah, I mean, well, at the end of the novel, I think, it seems obvious it would fall to Anne,
Yeah.
which sucks for Wentworth because he hates them, but that's like Anne's lot in life is to take care of these two idiots.
Yeah.
Which is not something I love to think about, but maybe she'll just get lucky and be like, "Oh, sorry, I'm at sea. Mary has to do it." Maybe Anne starts prioritizing Anne after this.
Yeah. Lady Russell, has a real growth arc.
Yeah, one of the like clearest like actual A to B's like I was wrong.
Yeah, and admits she was wrong and then rectifies the situation.
Yeah, we love growth.
We do. So happy for her, and I think that she has a happy ending because
Mhm.
she gets to see Anne happy, and that's all she's ever wanted.
Yeah, and I think like just like coming to terms with the fact that like no matter what happened back in the day, she's reconciled with this man and he actually is good for Anne is like these are good things.
Yes.
Mrs. Smith thriving.
Thriving, living life.
And God bless Mary, not a shred different from when this book started.
Yeah.
Not a shred of difference.
Yeah.
Like exactly where she was. Hates her kids,
Hates her kids.
faking sick, wanting attention, looking down on her sister-in-laws, like living, laughing, loving. Mary.
We love Mary.
Yes, yes.
And happy for her. Happy for her. Happy for Mrs. Smith. I think that perhaps some of our listeners might say that Mrs. Smith didn't have enough comeuppance at her for
I
what she's
feel
done.
like the years of being stuck in poverty and like rheumatic are like probably enough suffering for one person.
I agree. I think Mrs. Smith had a very happy ending, and I love that for her.
Yeah, no, good that she's no longer impoverished.
Yes.
She's never gonna be as wealthy as Anne now is with Captain Wentworth,
Mhm.
but she is no longer, like, living in a boarding house.
And she's rich in friends.
Yeah, and she gets to hang out with Anne and Wentworth, who are much better friends than Mr. Elliot ever was.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Megan asks, "What are 3 songs that are definitely on Anne's breakup playlist?" I assume this is breakup, like, at the beginning of the book with, when she was persuaded away.
I mean, hang on. Let me pull up her sad girl playlist
Oh, yeah.
and choose the 3 that we like the most. For those of you who don't know, our patrons lovingly made us a Anne Elliot
Sad girl
sad girl
playlist.
playlist. Okay. Okay, we've got I Will Always Love You by Whitney Houston is a big one because she will. I also feel strongly about Happier by Olivia Rodrigo.
I am not in love with this song, but the one that jumps to mind as, like, on point is The One That Got Away by Katy Perry.
Mm. I mean,
In Another Life, I Would Be Your Girl.
yeah, not knowing that song myself, based on the title alone, I agree.
I'll play it for you after. And I think also we gotta talk a Taylor song in the mix as well.
I Can Do It With a Broken Heart.
Yes.
She says, I will continue on, even if I'm wasting away.
Truly, she literally was.
There's also Cornelia Street.
I feel like a female version of When I Was Your Man from Bruno Mars
Mhm.
or Back to December by Taylor Swift would be a good one, actually.
That's a good one. That is on the list. Okay, should we pick 3?
Yes.
Okay. We've got I Can Do It With a Broken Heart by Taylor Swift, our Lord and Savior.
Mhm. Happier by Olivia Rodrigo.
Happier by Olivia Rodrigo. And The One That Got Away by Katy Perry.
It's not my favorite song, but it is on point.
I mean, we can pick a different one.
No. I'll live with it. I think it's good.
But if you want the full playlist, check it out on Spotify.
Yeah, surely do. God bless. Okay. And then we have one final question from me and Avi as well. These are similar, so I'm going to ask them in tandem. Avi asks, "Who changed more in the course of the novel, Anne or Wentworth?" And I asked whose character development is centered in the book.
Okay. I think that Wentworth changed more in the course of the novel. And we only learned about it in the end, but he went from being so mad at Anne to trying to hate Anne, trying to get over Anne, realizing he's still in love with Anne, and then accepting that he's still in love with Anne and going for it. Anne, meanwhile, went from being in love with Wentworth and being depressed about it to panicking that she's in the same room as Wentworth to getting together.
So I tend to agree that Anne's arc is more formed by circumstances surrounding her than any internal changes.
Mm-hmm.
More so than Wentworth, who spent 8 years trying to get over a woman and spent the course of this novel realizing he can't get over her.
Yeah.
So beautiful.
Very beautiful.
But I'll play devil's advocate and vouch for Anne's character growth in the novel as well. I think this story is one of confidence for Anne, one of becoming so sure in herself that she is able to resist pressure to go for Elliot. and is ultimately rewarded by getting what she's always wanted. And
That's a good
and
point.
kind of, like, actively pursues it by, like, dropping hints like, "Oh, yeah, I don't care if Mr. Elliot's going to be at that party tonight."
It's a good point.
Yeah. And I do think, like, Anne gaining her confidence and learning to, prioritize what she wants is definitely part of this novel, and it's a subtle portion, but if you go back and read the beginning, like, when we started this book, I had just finished the novel, and when we got back to the beginning with Anne, I was like, "Jesus, she's so sad." And then by the time you get to the end, she's, still sad, but, like, not nearly in the same way she used to be. She's, like, made friends, she's developed more community, she's come up a little in society and gained confidence. So, she does change through the course of the novel, but I think it's more that she is placed in better circumstances and able to thrive, whereas I think Wentworth is forced to reckon with his own broken heart in a real way that Anne has already reckoned with before the novel begins.
Yeah, that's a good point. Also, I Can Do It With a Broken Heart would be on his playlist as well.
Yeah, but for him, I feel like it's, like, a lot of, like, "I don't need you." I'm like, I got this,"
Yeah.
like, sort of, like, "I'm gonna get back at you," sort of, like, revenge song playlist
Mhm.
stuff, like, "Irreplaceable" by Beyoncé.
Mm. Yeah, he does have a lot of Beyonce.
Yeah,
We've
it's
talked about
it's
that.
I was thinking like Beyoncé, like, self-love, "I'm improving, I'm the best,"
Mhm.
like, "I got this covered," sort of situation. Whew, there's, like, another song. I'm, like, totally blanking on music right now. Um, "Guy on a Horse" by Maisie Peters,
Sure.
where she says, "Might be hard, but I'm Joan of Arc, and you're just a guy on a horse." The Good Witch is a good one for Anne. Actually, The Good Witch by Maisie Peters is going to be my pick to replace The One That Got Away by Katy Perry.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
Love it.
funniest quote.
Okay, so I already read the one about Mrs. Smith being happy even though she's got money now, which
Yeah.
I thought was pretty funny. I love this. Of all the family, Mary was probably the one most immediately gratified by the circumstance. It was creditable to have a sister married, and she might flatter herself with having been greatly instrumental to the connection by keeping Anne with her in the autumn. I couldn't help myself.
I know she's not gonna win the book, but Mary I love that we are just like, yeah, Mary Musgrove, queen and legend.
We love her.
Yeah, ironically, and then we unironically deeply love Mrs. Croft.
Yes, of
Like,
course.
those are my 2 icons of the book, is that Mrs. Croft is, like, channeling goals
Mhm.
the entire time because she's in this super happy marriage and, like, living her best life and traveling the world and being a badass and a feminist and all that shit,
Yeah.
calling men on their crap. Um Then Mary Musgrove is just from beginning to end, just perfect. No notes.
No notes.
No notes. Question moving forward about the adaptations or anything?
I mean, I'm excited about the adaptations. I'm mostly wondering if I'm gonna hate the 2019 or 2021.
I haven't watched that one, so it's gonna be really fun. We should definitely, like, do some sort of, like, recording of us
Oh,
watching it.
absolutely, or a watch party or something.
Yeah.
As always, I'm wondering which is gonna be my favorite. I haven't heard anything about any of the other ones, so that'll be really fun. I'm going in totally blind, and yeah.
And for our listeners, I have watched the one that came out in the mid-90s and no others at this point. Who wins the book?
I mean, Anne Elliot has to win the book.
She's pretty good. She's a pretty great heroine. I mean,
She's got her love, she got her guy.
she did. She got her bag. She got her guy. She was proven right in every way possible. She is like unspeakably, and we cannot stress this enough. Like it must be remarked upon that she is so
Hot.
hot, even at age 28.
Even at age 28.
Ancient spinster that she is.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Uh,
Oh boy. And she's just, she's just a legend. Like, yeah,
we love her.
love her. I'll give special shouts to a couple. I already gave to Mrs. Croft and Mary.
Yes.
We'll have to give to Captain Wentworth for the best love letter ever written.
Ah,
Um,
you pierce my soul.
I am half agony, half hope.
You pierce my soul.
Just so you guys know, I played that song by Amanda Fagan. Shouts out to you, Amanda, for giving us that album. I played that song for Molly as soon as we finished the letter episode, and Molly has been just like had it on loop since.
Even Mel, it has it stuck in her head.
It's a huge bop.
It really is. Everyone should go listen to it.
Yeah, it's a fantastic song. The whole album is great, but like half agony, half hope. The Persuasion song really, really gets into the feeling of reading the letter. It's so cool.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's the end of the book.
It is the end of the book. We've done it, Graham. It's time for the party music. We always do the party music when we end the book. We end the book, yeah. For next time, listeners, we're actually going to take a peek at Jane Austen's alternate ending in a little special episode before we get into any movie watching. So we're gonna read through the alternate ending of Persuasion and tell you our thoughts. It'll be like a little bite-sized treat of an episode. We're going on slight-ish hiatus, but don't worry, listeners, it's only going to be a few weeks, and we do have some content lined up for you to enjoy in the meantime. And then we'll be back to discuss some of the movie adaptations. So until next time, stay proper.
And find yourself a husband.
Find yourself a Wentworth.
Find yourself a Wentworth. Do not find yourself a Mr. Elliot.
No.
The end. Pod and Prejudice is edited by Molly Burdick and audio produced by Graham Cook. Our show art is designed by Torrance Brown. Our show is transcribed by SpeechDocs Podcast Transcription. For transcripts and to learn more about our team, check out our website at podandprejudice.com. To keep up with the show, you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Pod and Prejudice. If you love what you hear, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/podandprejudice to see how you can support us, or just drop us a rating and a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening.